Every time wind moves past a wing, blood moves through an artery, or smoke curls up from a candle, the same set of equations is quietly governing what happens. Those equations are called the Navier Stokes equations, and they are, in essence, nothing more than Newton's second law, force equals mass times acceleration, written for a fluid instead of a solid block. In this lesson, we will build that equation from the ground up. We will not start with the formula. We will start with a single drop of fluid and ask a simple question: what forces act on it, and how does it accelerate? By the end, the equation that looks intimidating in every textbook will instead feel like something you could have written yourself. Let's begin. A solid keeps its shape when you push on it. A fluid, whether liquid or gas, does not. It simply flows and takes the shape of whatever contains it. At the microscopic level, a fluid is a swarm of countless individual molecules colliding and darting about in every direction. Tracking every single molecule would be impossible, and it would also be pointless because engineers do not care about individual molecules. They care about the fluid's overall behavior. So instead, we treat the fluid as a continuum, a smooth, continuous substance with a well-defined velocity, pressure, and density at every point in space. This is called the continuum hypothesis, and it is the foundation of everything that follows. At every point of that continuum, we imagine a velocity vector, the speed and direction of the fluid at that exact location, at that exact instant. Taken together, all of these vectors form what is called the velocity field. Notice that the field is not uniform. The fluid moves faster in the middle of the duct and slower near the walls, exactly the way traffic moves faster in the center lane than near the curb. This variation from point to point is what makes fluid motion so much richer and so much harder than the motion of a single rigid body. We write this field mathematically as a vector with three components: u, v, and w, one for each spatial direction, all of them functions of position and time. A solid key. To use Newton's second law, we must first isolate a piece of fluid and ask, what forces act on it? Let us imagine shrinking our attention down to a tiny cube of fluid, so small that we can treat it as a single particle. This imaginary parcel is our free body diagram. Just as with a solid block, every force acting on it will either push, pull, or shear it, and the sum of those forces determines how it accelerates. First, the surrounding fluid squeezes it from every side. This is pressure, a force that always pushes perpendicular or normal to each face of the parcel. Second, if neighboring layers of fluid move at different speeds, they drag on one another along the faces of the parcel, exactly like friction. This tangential force is called viscous shear, and it exists only because real fluids have viscosity, an internal resistance to flowing. Third, the parcel has weight. Gravity acts on every ounce of its mass directly, not through its surface. Forces of this kind, that act throughout the volume rather than on the boundary, are called body forces. Pressure and viscous friction act on the surface of the parcel, so we call them surface forces. Gravity acts on its mass, so we call a body force. Every force in fluid mechanics falls into one of these two families. To use Newton's, we know the forces. Now we need the other half of Newton's second law, acceleration. For a fluid, this is surprisingly subtle because we're not tracking one fixed particle, we are watching a field. Picture fluid speeding through a narrowing nozzle in steady flow, meaning the picture itself never changes with time. And yet, a parcel of fluid traveling through it clearly speeds up as the channel narrows. It accelerates. This speeding up happens purely because the parcel is moving to a new location where the field itself is different. We call it convective acceleration, acceleration due to motion through a spatially varying field. There's a second, more familiar kind of acceleration. If you open a valve and the flow simply speeds up everywhere at once as time passes, that is called local acceleration, change with time at a fixed point in space. Add these two contributions together, and we get the true acceleration of a fluid parcel. The local rate of change, plus the convective rate of change due to motion through the field. This combination is used so often that it earns its own symbol and its own name. The material derivative, written d over dt, is the derivative that follows the fluid parcel itself, wherever it goes. Before we get to forces and acceleration, there is one more physical law fluid must obey. Mass can neither be created nor destroyed. This single idea gives us our first equation. Imagine a small, fixed box in space, a control volume, sitting inside a moving fluid. Fluid is free to flow in through one face and out through another. If more mass flows and then flows out, the density inside the box must rise. If more flows out than in, the density must fall. If the rates match exactly, the density stays constant. There is no other possibility because mass is conserved. In words, this balance says, the rate at which mass accumulates inside the box equals the rate it flows in minus the rate it flows out. Applying that balance to an infinitesimally small box and shrinking it to a point turns this word statement into a partial differential equation, called the continuity equation. Density ρ can vary with position and time. Most liquids, and even air at everyday speeds, barely change density at all. Treating density as constant, we call the flow incompressible, and the continuity equation collapses beautifully into a single, elegant statement. The divergence of the velocity field is zero. In plain language, whatever volume of fluid flows into any tiny region must flow back out. Fluid cannot pile up or vanish anywhere. This is our first building block of the Navier-Stokes system. We now have both ingredients ready. The forces on a fluid parcel from earlier and its true acceleration, the material derivative. It is time to put them together with Newton's second law. For a rigid body, this law is simple. Force equals mass times acceleration. For a fluid parcel of density ρ, mass per unit volume is simply ρ, so we write the law per unit volume instead of per whole parcel. This makes it valid at every point of the continuum. On the left, mass per unit volume, ρ, times the material derivative, the true acceleration of the parcel we derived earlier. On the right, the surface forces and body forces we identified when we drew the free body diagram. The surface forces, pressure, and viscous shear together can be bundled into a single mathematical object called the stress tensor, sigma. It captures both the normal push of pressure and the tangential drag of viscosity on every face of the parcel at once. The net surface force per unit volume turns out to be exactly the divergence of this stress tensor, how much the stress changes from one face of the parcel to the opposite face. And the body force is simply gravity, density times the gravitational acceleration vector, g. Combine everything, and we arrive at the Cauchy momentum equation, the general statement of Newton's second law. What makes a fluid, rather than steel or rubber, is only how the stress tensor sigma relates to the motion of the material. That relationship is our final missing piece. We left one question open. How exactly does the stress tensor depend on the fluid's motion? Isaac Newton proposed the simplest possible answer, and it turns out to describe water, air, and most common fluids remarkably well. Consider fluid trapped between two parallel plates, the top one sliding steadily while the bottom stays still. The fluid layers in between are dragged along at speeds that vary smoothly from zero at the bottom to full speed at the top. Newton observed that the shear stress, tau, needed to drag one layer past its neighbor is directly proportional to how steeply the velocity changes across the gap. The constant of proportionality, mu, is the fluid's viscosity. A fluid that obeys exactly this simple, linear rule is called a Newtonian fluid. Water, air, and most oils all qualify. Honey and blood, for comparison, do not, and need more elaborate rules that are beyond today's lesson. generalized to 3 dimensions. The stress tensor for a Newtonian incompressible fluid splits neatly into 2 parts. An isotropic pressure term, pushing equally in every direction, and a viscous term proportional to the local velocity gradient. Substitute this Newtonian stress tensor directly into the Cauchy momentum equation from the previous lesson, and every term simplifies. The divergence of the pressure part becomes minus the pressure gradient. The divergence of the viscous part becomes viscosity times the Laplacian of velocity for an incompressible flow. Putting every piece together gives us, at last, the incompressible Navier-Stokes equation. On the left, mass times acceleration, exactly as in ordinary Newtonian mechanics, split into its local and convective parts. The first term on the right, the pressure gradient, pushing fluid from high pressure toward low pressure. The second term, viscosity, smoothing out differences in velocity between neighboring layers of fluid, exactly the friction we watched between the sliding plates. And finally, gravity, or any other body force acting on the fluid. This is the equation. For physical effects, inertia, pressure, viscosity, and gravity balanced against one another at every single point of a moving fluid, at every instant of time. Let's put the whole journey on one screen. 2 equations working together. Conservation of mass, telling us the flow cannot pile up or vanish anywhere. And conservation of momentum, Newton's second law, balancing inertia against pressure, viscosity, and gravity. Together, these 4 scalar equations, 1 for mass and 3 for the components of momentum, in principle determine the velocity and pressure of a fluid everywhere, for all time, once we know its starting condition and its boundaries. This is not an abstract exercise. The very same equation, unchanged, governs the airflow over a wing, the churn of ocean currents, the pulse of blood through an artery, the flow through a pipeline, and even the swirling smoke in a computer-animated film. And despite how well engineers use it every single day, one deep mathematical question about this equation remains unsolved: whether smooth, well-behaved solutions always exist in 3 dimensions. It is one of the 7 Millennium Prize problems, with a $1 million reward still unclaimed. Thank you for watching. In the next lesson, we will non-dimensionalize this equation and meet the single number that decides whether a flow is smooth or turbulent, the Reynolds number. Let's put the